Now Frank Bender can show us what he might have looked like. His goal is not just to sculpt Adam, but to reveal his personality.
I tried to get into his head just like I would a fugitive. Intuition is the binder between art and science. It's the part that pulls it all together and gives it that life, that spark. I picture him very much alive and with a lot of the basic feelings that we have today. Confidence at one point, insecurity at another.
Finally, Wells comes face to face with the man he's been searching for. A new portrait of the common ancestor of every man today. Adam. Without the skull, we can't know for sure what Adam looked like. But a combination of genetic evidence, Bender's forensic skills, and cutting-edge computer software suggests he looked something like this. Thousands of years after the Bible, and hundreds of years after Michelangelo, we have a whole new face for Adam.
I like the expression. He's got a very forceful look.
He's intent on something, maybe taking over the world. You begin to get perhaps an insight into why these guys won out and why this guy's our ancestor.
Science can't tell for sure what set Adam apart. There were other men who lived alongside him. But over the centuries, all the other men's lines died out. Maybe some had only daughters, or no children at all. Their Y chromosomes were lost forever. Only Adam's lineage survives. Only Adam's lineage survives.
As the nation slowly regains its confidence and self-esteem, African Americans still struggle against a system known as Jim Crow. This legal segregation has been in force for decades, preventing black people from exercising their rights as citizens.
After slavery, what you got was a culture of slavery in Jim Crow laws. The emphasis on the fact that African Americans did not belong, that they would never become members of the political or moral community, that they'd never participate fully in this society as equal citizens, which is what freedom in the sense of democracy means.
Even fame is no protection. As one of the world's best-known contraltos, Marian Anderson, discovers one spring day in 1939. Marian Anderson has been invited to perform in Washington, D.C. by Howard University, which applies to the Daughters of the American Revolution for the use of Constitution Hall. The DAR decides they will not allow an African American to sing in their concert hall. Many people are outraged, including the First Lady, a champion of civil rights and a lifelong member of the DAR, Eleanor Roosevelt. She resigns from the group, and with her support, the federal government offers the Lincoln Memorial as the new site of the concert. When 75,000 people, black and white, turn out for the concert, the event becomes a landmark day for the emerging civil rights movement.
All I knew as I stepped forward was the overwhelming impact of that multitude. I had a feeling that a great wave of goodwill poured out from these people, and my heart beat like mad, loud and strong, as if it wanted to say something.
It was hot in Tuscaloosa this morning, very hot, nearly 100 degrees, and it was humid. And weather merely served to add to the tense atmosphere on the campus of the University of Alabama. This is what happened as Nicholas Katzenbach, accompanied by two federal marshals, left their car and approached Governor Wallace standing in the schoolhouse door. The two Negro students, Vivian Malone and Jimmy A. Hood, stayed in the car. The time was about 12:47 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
Just a minute. Just a minute. I am the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. I am here to accompanied by the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama and by the Marshal for the Northern District of Alabama. And I have with me here a proclamation signed by the President of the United States, which calls upon you to cease obstruction to justice in this state. The proclamation, Governor, was signed by the President within the last hour.
As Governor and Chief Magistrate of the state of Alabama, I deem it to be my solemn obligation and duty to stand before you, representing the rights and sovereignty of this state and its peoples. The unwelcomed, unwanted, unwarranted, and force-induced intrusion upon the campus of the University of Alabama today of the might of the central government offers frightful example of the oppression of the rights, privileges, and sovereignty of this state by officers of the federal government. Now, therefore, I, George C. Wallace, as governor of the state of Alabama, have by my action raised issues between the central government and the sovereign state of Alabama, which said issues should be adjudicated in the manner prescribed by the Constitution of the United States, and now being mindful of my duties and responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the state of Alabama, and seeking to preserve and maintain the peace and dignity of this state and the individual freedoms of the citizens thereof, do hereby denounce and forbid this illegal and unwarranted action by the central government.
Governor Wallace, I take it from that statement that you are going to stand in that door and that you are not going to carry out the orders of this court, and that you are going to resist us from doing so. Is that correct?
I stand upon the statement.
Stand upon that statement. Governor, I'm not interested in a show. I don't know what the purpose of the show is. I am interested in the orders of these courts being enforced. That is my only responsibility here. I ask you once more, the choice is yours. There is no choice that the United States government has in this but to see that the lawful orders of its court are enforced. The consequences of your stand must rest with you. The choice is yours. I would ask you once again to responsibly step aside, and if you do not, I'm going to assure you that the orders of those courts will be enforced. Two students who simply seek an education on this campus are presently on the campus. They have a right to be here, protected by that court order. They have a right to register here. It is a simple problem, scarcely worth this kind of attention in my judgment. And those students who remain on this campus, they will register today. They will go to school tomorrow, and they will go to school at this university at this summer session. The university has indicated its willingness to accept them. From the outset, Governor, all of us have known that the final chapter of this would be the admission of these students. I ask you once again to reconsider the consequences of your statement, and I'll ask you once again, will you give me the assurance that you will step aside and peacefully do your duty? Very well. Students will remain on the campus.
We are winning in this fight because we are awakening the American people to the dangers that we have spoken about so many times, which is so evident today, the trend toward military dictatorship in this country. We shall now return to Montgomery for the purpose of continuing this fight, this constitutional fight, because we are winning. We shall continue to work for a better Alabama for all the people of this state, both white and Negro. And it is my prayer that God above shall bless all the people of this state, both white and black.
This, then, is the moment when Governor George Wallace of Alabama walked away from the schoolhouse door
just like to say that I'm glad that the registration is over and everything is over now. I think we can get down to studying. This is our main purpose here, and I'm glad that it has all been over now, and all we have to do now is get down, go get our books and start studying. That's all.
Well, I'd like to say that at this time, this is our first and final press conference. And we'd like to say that we are very happy to note that our registration has taken place without incident. And we hope that we will be able to get on to our main purpose for being here, and that is to get an education. And this is our final statement.
As you may have heard, NBC Today host Megyn Kelly's show was canceled this past week following her on-air remarks expressing acceptance of blackface. It's a racist show business practice most of us thought was long gone. But as Maurice Dubois is about to tell us, blackface has a long history in our country. And we caution you, his report unavoidably includes many offensive and disturbing images.
It happens all too frequently, often at Halloween, but not exclusively.
They thought it was a joke, but it really just was not funny at all.
For example, 2 years ago in Maplewood, New Jersey.
Her daughter posted this photo of herself and a friend in blackface.
The two girls had no idea what blackface was or the history of it.
The history of blackface is long and complex and deeply ingrained in our culture.
Who was that lady I saw you with this afternoon? That was no lady. That was my wife.
Even Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd blacked up.
Fantastic, isn't it? Run all night.
For more than 100 years, white and then black performers wore dark makeup and created not only a popular theatrical form, but stereotypes that are still with us today.
This makes you uncomfortable, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It does make me feel uncomfortable to talk about these things because they are incredibly disturbing and revolting.
Eric Lott, a professor at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, says blackface represents a strange mix of envy, fascination, desire, and fear.
Explain the fear part to me. What are these white performers, what are these white people afraid of?
They're afraid of black groups, mobs, rising up and taking the power.
Minstrel shows began in the 1830s, and white performers used burnt cork or later black grease paint. Minstrelsy eventually became the most popular form of entertainment in the country.
Ah, yes.
I asked Margot Jefferson, the Pulitzer Prize-winning critic, to look at some images from the New York Public Library.
The shininess of the black against the big white clown's mouth, the hat, the overlong tailcoat, mocking. It always gives me the jolt that racist history does. Blackface is so tied to comedy, to people enjoying themselves, to people having fun, that rattles you still more.
Well, Mr. Tambo, you seem to be enjoying yourself this evening. Enjoying myself? I sure is.
White minstrel performers claim that what they did on stage was based on their perceptions of how black people lived.
Some of this came out of a genuine fascination with the music, the songs, the dances, the performance styles of black people.
But it's also where Jump Jim Crow was born, along with other characters depicted as lazy, lying, or buffoonish. Remember, this was all happening before the Civil War.
Slavery was all about creating visions, types, stereotypes of an entire race of people as subhuman in every way.
By the 1860s, African Americans began using blackface on stage.
Why on earth would a black performer put on blackface and demean him or herself?
Look, this is the 19th century. They had limited options. They were expected to.
Why?
Because it made the audiences comfortable. You can be fascinated, you can be excited, but you can always feel superior.
In effect, the black makeup on a black performer became a theatrical mask with many layers of meaning. Professor Eric Lotz.
The mask, I think, says to white audiences, you have nothing to fear. Go ahead, enjoy yourself. To black audiences, I think any number of things might have been communicated, like, can you believe that these people are making me put on this mask so they will be entertained? You know, in other words, there's a kind of winking to the black audience. But it gave black performers access to the stage.
One of the biggest black stars to come out of the minstrel tradition was Bert Williams, who wore blackface from vaudeville to Broadway.
It's clear that he was a genius of a performer.
But how did he reconcile performing in this demeaning art form?
He was very melancholy about it. He knew it was necessary for his career, as all other black performers knew it.
Minstrelsy on stage basically died out in the 1920s, but blackface lived on in the movies.
I'd walk a million miles, but one of your smiles.
In 1927, Al Jolson starred in the pioneering talking picture The Jazz Singer, playing a young man who prefers singing popular music rather than his family's traditional Hebrew prayers.
West, but I know where the sunshine sets.
I don't want to look at it. What reaction do you get?
I totally understand.
Wait a minute. I don't like the way he said that.
In the Our Gang comedies of the 1930s, Spanky appeared in blackface.
Buckwheat, did you say Spanky was in a lot of trouble? Yes, sir.
The gag here is that the gang doesn't realize that that's Spanky in blackface until they actually see Buckwheat.
Hiya, Buckwheat. Hiya, Buckwheat.
So the gist of it is that you put blackface makeup on anyone and they become black.
And that's supposed to be hilarious.
And it's supposed to be really funny.
When he grows up.
And it goes on. During the golden age of the Hollywood musical, Judy Garland.
When he walks down the street, folks will say, pleased to meet Mr. Franklin D. Roosevelt Jones.
Bing Crosby.
That's why we celebrate this blessed February day. Abraham.
Fred Astaire, and many others, all blacked up. It's still in the culture.
It is too easy, I think, simply to dismiss the history of blackface as that racist stuff. And most of us are better than that. I don't think most of us are better than that. We are that. That's what we are.
You know, some people say in order to move forward, we need to put this stuff behind us, as painful, as just upsetting that it may be.
Well, you know, any form of history that gets suppressed or repressed or erased out, it comes back to haunt. What has to happen now is a discussion, an acknowledgement of this charged, complicated, painful history.
And here to present the actual films of tonight's bold journey is John Stevenson.
Deep in the jungles of French Guiana, Mr. Herman Jessen, the Amazon trader, makes his way up the Moroni River, aided by friendly natives. His object? To trade small manufactured goods with the primitive Indians along its banks for their spears, baskets, and primitive artifacts. His expedition must cut its way through the dense jungle overgrowth and often has to eat only what nature provides. And now, here's the man you saw in the film earlier, Mr. Herman Jessen. We're proud to have you with us, Mr. Jessen.
Thank you, John.
I'd like to ask, first of all, sir, how remote are these Indians? Sir, how remote are these Indians? Sir, how remote are these Indians from civilization?
These Indians live about 250 miles up the Moroni River. It's very hard to get up there because the rains endanger any trip, and the river is either too low or too high. It's just in July that one can penetrate into those villages.
Oh, is this your first trip into this area?
No, into this area it's my second trip, but I've made 25 trips into South America so far, and I expect to leave very shortly on another one.
Well, where are you from originally?
I was born in Europe, but now I am engaged in the import-export business, and I spend about half of my time down in the Amazon jungles and the other half of my time here in Los Angeles.
Well, we're all anxious to see what being an Amazon trader really means, so let's start now.
We start in the town of Saint-Laurent-du-Maroni in French Guiana on the Moroni River. This river divides Dutch Guiana from French Guiana, and the native quarters house these beautiful canoes of African design which the natives use. Two of the men who made this trip with me, my companions, on a long journey trading with the natives of this region. The things that I use for trading with these people are mirrors, fish hooks, beads, flashlights, also tobacco and salt and sugar that the natives can use. I'm trading a knife for a comb and a basket for beads. Our boat was 50 foot long and 4 feet wide, and there were 4 of us going on this long trip up the Moroni River. We are leaving the town and passing by the native quarters, and we are on our way to Mukumak Mountains and trading with the natives of the region.
How long a river trip will this be, Mr. Jessen?
It's about 2 months' trip, John.
And how long will it be in terms of miles?
It's about 500 miles each way. We are getting our guns ready as we are living off the land. You'll see that later. This little boy is one of the sons of the Bushmen, and I gave him a piece of chewing gum, and that's what he did with it. He couldn't figure it out. To pole our way into this native bony Bushman village. This is the harbor, and here are some of the typical canoes with African design. Tutu presenting me to the chief, Grand Tifu, who is a very gentle chief, governing these bush people totally. And he really dressed up the next day in my honor in this French naval officer's uniform with his wife, and I undressed in his honor in the native garb of the region.
Very incongruous, isn't it?
Oh, yes. This boy is making an oar for me, which I traded with him for a knife. And the girl is winnowing rice. In another part of the village, we see one of the girls fixing the hair of a lady chief of the village. This is another little baby of Tutu. And the paddle I'm trading here with these bushmen. One of the native girls brought us some fruits, and we are trading it for this empty oil can. African culture prevails completely in every respect. shoving off on our way now to the next bony village of Assisi. And you see the way these boys are built with their shoulders and muscles, that they really are good for this type of work.
They're very stocky people, Mr. Jessen.
Oh yes, they're very healthy, and they're really children of nature. The language is taki-taki. It's a language of about 300 words. I learned to respect these people. I never lost anything. On the whole trip, everything was kept in order. And as I came to these villages, they all brought me gifts and eggs and rice, and I was really treated royally going up there. The town of Assisi, the second bony village. Here's a bakery. You see, these people are very primitive, but still in all they are of high moral quality. They don't know hate, they don't know jealousy and envy. These people were very much interested in trading with me, and of course dancing and making friends came first. It's kind of a combination of cha-cha-cha and merengue. You hear these rattles now. It's just like Africa, John. Their language and their customs and their music is all imported from Africa, and they're pure Africans. They're very proud of their racial background. The children have full command of this African rhythm. The little ones get into the act, and this one to the right is the son of the chief. We leave this little town of Assisi, and we are hitting some very fierce rapids now. We are getting ready for the Indian villages, which are further up. And here are the first Indians which we met. The Oyana Indians are the Indians who live further up the river, and they have long hair, men and women alike, and we are trying to see whether we can get permission to get up further into that country and have them guide us. I love to do as they do, and I think the best way to go into these native places is to dress just the way they do, and they feel very much at home when you approach them in that respect. We are now starting to trade with the natives. First making friends and then trading. The chief's wife is doing some trading with Tutu, my head man, but they don't seem to have any satisfaction from the deal because Tutu doesn't seem to be happy about the deal, neither does the chief's wife. And we gave her some food, and that calmed her down. Lipo Lipo is the Indian boy who guided us all the way across these mountains and up the river. Across the Tumucumac Mountains and back to the Indian villages. He was a fine boy of about 16 years old and very nice and very trustworthy. We needed this Indian boy to go along with us to help, inasmuch as he was the only one that had ever been up that stream. The native way of drinking. I paid these bushmen in French money, and the Indian boy I paid in beads at the end of the trip. It's only 1 month out of the year that one can go up that river because it's either too high or too low, and it's just in July of each year that the river is at the right height where it can be penetrated way up to its source. Now this is Aloike, one of the most interesting Indian villages in which I ever visited. John, the town of Aloike is the largest and the most colorful of the Indian villages up this river, and you see the French flag flying. The chief's house is airy and comfortable, and the women chop the wood to make a brew. It's a type of Mulatto drink. It's a combination of river water and corn. They dilute the masticated corn and bring it to a boiling point, and this is used as their drink during the dancing celebration which goes on at this time yearly.
This is an incredible journey, Mr. Jesuit.
Yes, you see, we have to hack our way through. Everything is done by hand. We had no saw along. We had to use an axe all the time. We changed off, and in this heat, it was just terrible. When it wasn't raining, the heat was beating down on us. It's infested with piranhas, and the bushman advised me not to swim in this water. You see, the Indian boy is a good woodman. Tutu is not only a good boatsman, he's also a wonderful fisherman. And when we weren't hunting up there, we were fishing. There was plenty of game. There was no noise of the motor to disturb the animals, and we had so much game that we sometimes quit hunting and fishing and just tried to make headway as fast as we could. Here's the other boy jumping into the water to get our lunch out. This was a lunch for the day.
Wonderful catch.
Yes, it was a big fish. We're back in the town of Saint Laurent. We are unloading all the artifacts which I traded with these natives, and to bring these back to the States now. We are all safe and sound. Nobody was killed or hurt, and it was a very successful trading expedition. The boys are helping me carry all the items and my equipment back to the starting point.
Jean-Jacques, dis-moi, c'est un video. Maintenant, tell me, what do you think? What do you think of this act so far?
This is the perfect time for the day with these people opening the carnival. Why? Because they're a bunch of Indians, which are the old-time people who used to live here.
Residents.
Residents, exactly. Indians.
Yeah.
They're a bunch of Indians, which are the old-time people who used to live here.
Residents.
Residents, exactly. Indians.
Yeah.
Message. So, here they are, especially with a name like Boyo, which is an Indian name. Enjoy the show with the Indian people from Haiti now.
Oh, yeah! Do your best. Let me go. Yes! Simone, vous pouvez dire à cette fille qui a fait le sexe comme ça. Dis-moi la belle, belle femme, on va pas régler la vie. Mais imagine, mais imagine parce qu'on va la mettre sur sa clé là. Voilà la belle vie, belle tête de femme, hein? Yes! Oui, 25 ans. Enfin. Darling.
Okay, everybody, just I want you to pair up on this slide. And who's Native American? Just pair up with someone sitting next to you. It's not a trick question, by the way. Only one. What'd you say?
I said B.
B? You said B? What'd you say? C? Yeah? Did you say B? C? You said C? Damn, dude.
I can't really see A that well, but I guess from the other ones, I'd say B.
You'd say B? Okay, well, the answer is A, by the way. The others, did anybody say A? All right, good. So the others are Siberian, so we're going to come to this. All right, let's do the next one. Which one's of Native American ancestry and which one is of Han Chinese ancestry? And the Han ethnic group is the dominant ethnic group in China.
I'm going to say that the one on the right is the Han Chinese ancestry, but I'm not too sure.
The one on the right is Han? What do you say, bro? What did you come to?
Left Native American.
Left Native American?
Right.
Is that what you say? The right is Chinese? Yeah? What's that? The top one is Native American? Okay, so listen. Yeah, it's a real subtle difference, right? Is that what you said?
The top one is Chinese.
Top one is Chinese?
Yes.
Dude, killing it. All right, but you're wrong. The top one is Native American. So, all right, go to the next slide. Okay. Asian or European? European or American, bro?
European.
European?
Yeah.
Dude, European or American?
American?
European?
You mean Asian?
I mean, European or Asian?
Asian.
Yeah? Dude, what do you got? Come on, man. The two of you got to have it down. What do you say?
I think he's Asian.
You think he's Asian?
I have no idea.
Yeah? Bro?
I think he's European.
Think he's European? Bro, how about you?
It's definitely European.
Yeah? All right, so here's the deal. You ready? Can you go back to the map? Let me show you something. So, no, the map, the one I think it's like slide 3 or something maybe? Yeah, slide 3. Yeah, okay, so here. Check this out. So here's the map of human migration patterns. So notice how coming out of Asia here and out of China, and northern China, so Mongolia up around here, so people migrate this way, okay? We're getting new evidence, by the way, of the migration pattern that people actually came across the channels. It's quite fascinating. Stuff is changing a lot, but here's the idea. Genes come this way. Well, how do genes change? The people that stop here and the people that go here, they're the same. They're not any different, genetically speaking. As you start to come down this way, you start to see very different things. But indigenous peoples of the Americas, right, look a lot like people in this area of the world. But notice, right, how it comes this way. But so Siberian, and 3 of those slides are from, those photos are people right here, and 1 is people right here. So 1 is American, got it? 1 is Asian / but it's really kind of European because they're Russian, because Mongolia and Siberia is part of Russia, and they're really Siberian. And Russia is a European country, and so you could argue that all those folks are European because they're Russian. Got it? You see how, like, the complexity of this? So, but what are they really? And how are they any different? Their DNA is exactly the same. And then we come down here and we have this Native American woman here from this area who looks a lot like somebody from over here that you couldn't really tell the difference because the genes just followed. So I remember I spent a lot of time, I lived in Ecuador for quite a while. I was doing my doctoral research there, and I would spend time in the mountains. I studied this one particular region. It's a province called Aswai. in the south central part of Ecuador. And I was going into communities where they had never seen white people in some of the communities. They were indigenous communities, and it was like, except priests who were of European ancestry, but they never had visitors, right? And this is actually a true story. So I spent a lot of time with priests and nuns and, a whole bunch, learned a lot about the Catholic Church, that a lot of times Catholics don't want to know a lot of things that you learn from the inside, but it's all good. And I would go into these communities. Now the priests the Catholicism had sort of conquered them, right? And imposed Christianity on them, the indigenous peoples. And they would show all the images of Jesus. And the images of Jesus are of a white guy with long hair and a beard. And I had long hair and I had a beard at the time. And so I imagine the priests for generations and generations have been saying, Jesucristo está viniendo otra vez. So Jesus is coming again. Jesus is coming. He's coming. He's coming. And in comes this guy on a horseback with the priests with long brown hair and a beard, and people going up to the priest and saying, Padrecito, ¿está él? ¿Es él? It's him? Is that him? Is that Jesus? Like, it's really quite a power trip on my part to have people coming down and bowing at my feet and so on. But that's neither here nor there. But I would be in communities sometimes where I really thought I was in Central Asia, like in the middle of China, because the features, maybe sitting in candlelight or something, and the features of people were exactly the same. I really didn't know. I thought I had been transported. Anyway, the other guy is from Kazakhstan, and Kazakhstan is right here. The guy, is he Asian or is he European? And he is Kazakh. So if you know, is anybody Kazakh in here by chance? Anybody? A couple semesters ago, I had someone who is Kazakh. So he is both European and Asian in a way, but he's really European. Kazakhstan is considered to be a European country, so he's European, but he looks Asian. So go figure.
Tonight we're going to report a story that's almost 80 years old, but it will come as news to most Americans as, frankly, it did to us. This country's most violent race riot didn't happen in Newark or Watts or Detroit. It happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma in June of 1921. For decades, city officials covered it up. The history books barely mentioned it, and people, white people that is, hardly ever talked about Tulsa burning. But all that's changing now. The state commission has begun investigating the riot and is already raising tough questions about what today's citizens owe yesterday's victims. And it's revived memories for George Monroe of a night 78 years ago when his mother saw 4 white men walking up to their house carrying torches.
Our mother told us to get up under the bed, and we got up under the bed. We could just see just their feet. They came in and set fire to the curtains, and one stepped on my fingers, and my sister put her hand over my mouth to be sure to stop me, because she could tell I was fixing to holler because it hurt.
Monroe escaped with some sore fingers. His home and the rest of Tulsa's black neighborhood, called Greenwood, was burning. Before the riot, 10,000 blacks lived in Greenwood, did business there, prospered there. In fact, Greenwood was one of the nation's most vibrant black communities. But children quickly learned that they lived in a different world from whites.
The tracks was a dividing line. Now, every Sunday, we would climb on top of the coal car and throw enough coal on the side of, on our side, and I guess they did the same thing, but every Sunday we had a good coal fight. We would throw at them and they would throw at us.
Like a kid's little riot?
That's a good description of it, like a kid's riot. That's right.
The kids, of course, learned from the adults.
There was total segregation, wasn't there?
Oh, that was the wonder of it all. After Oklahoma became a state, the first law passed by the Oklahoma legislature was Senate Bill 1. that completely segregated the state.
Don Ross represents Greenwood today in the state legislature. He's one of the prime movers behind the campaign to uncover Tulsa's dirty little secret.
How old were you when you heard about the riot of 1921?
I was 15 and in high school.
You hadn't heard about it until you were 15?
Never heard, didn't believe it.
What Ross heard then is that on the morning of May 30th, a young black man got into the elevator of a building downtown, and that the elevator operator, a 17-year-old white girl, screamed.
The Tulsa Tribune, which was the afternoon daily newspaper, printed a fantastic write-up of this event. They had a front-page story that said, "Nab Negro for attacking girl." Within the next hour, there's lynch talk on the streets of Tulsa.
Historian Scott Ellsworth has been studying the Tulsa riot for 20 years. It's not just an academic quest for Ellsworth. He was born and raised in Tulsa.
So the word of a lynching was out in the streets, whites started gathering. How were blacks reacting?
Great concern. I mean, everybody knew what was about to happen.
Many of Tulsa's blacks were veterans of the First World War and armed. A group went to the courthouse and offered to help defend the jail and its black prisoner. The sheriff told them to go home.
And as they're leaving, a white man goes up to a tall black vet and says, "Where you going with that gun, nigger?" And the vet says, "I'm going to use it if I have to." The white man says, "Like hell you are, give it to me." A struggle, shot goes off. The worst riot in American history begins.
Just about then, as dusk was settling in, Venice Sims was getting ready for her high school prom.
Had a beautiful dress, shoes, everything new. And even some borrowed pearls. The seamstress had let me have her borrowed pearls to wear, everything.
Do you have a boyfriend?
Sure. Secretly, my daddy didn't allow us to court. But I had one.
And then you're supposed to go to the prom, and what happens?
Well, that's when the riot, that's when it started. And that's when the bullets started falling.
Miss Sims, her family, and many Greenwood residents got out of town during the night. Others stayed and fought, but by dawn, they were overwhelmed.
Right before dawn, as many as 10,000 whites descended upon Black Tulsa.
Opening fire?
Opening fire. There was a block-by-block battle throughout the black community. They would force the occupants of a house out. If people resisted, they were murdered on the spot. The homes were looted, and then they were set fire to.
Did the white authorities do anything to try to prevent this or control it?
They don't. They spend most of their time arresting blacks and disarming blacks, preventing them from defending their homes and businesses, taking them to these internment centers around town.
Sounds like a precursor of ethnic cleansing.
Absolutely.
Kenny Booker's father hid his wife and 5 children in the attic just before armed whites came to the front door.
We could hear him from the attic talking to him, said, "Nigga, do you have a gun?" I think he said no. And he said, "Don't set my house on fire, please." He didn't tell him why, but after he left, not long after he left, they set it on fire, and we had to scramble down in a hurry. And his sister, that's 6 years old, she said, "Is the world on fire, Kenny?" I said, "I don't know, but we're in trouble, deep trouble."
The trouble came from the air, too. Investigators say some of the fires you see in this rare footage of the riot were caused by whites dropping explosives from World War I vintage planes flying over Greenwood. The flames destroyed almost every home and business in Greenwood, 35 square blocks in all.
We didn't have no home. Everything was burned. All over there where we live, just burned down to the ground.
Late in the day, martial law was declared and National Guard troops patrolled the streets. The dead were everywhere, the bodies lying where they fell. Photographers turned some of their grisly pictures into souvenir postcards. Most of the dead were buried quickly in unmarked graves around town, but some apparently were laid to rest here in Tulsa's Oak Lawn Cemetery in this anonymous section reserved for paupers. There were no funerals. The authorities outlawed funerals. There were no coffins, no headstones, no records of the burials. But a 10-year-old boy saw it all. Clyde Eddy walked by the cemetery with a friend, saw some men digging and some big wooden crates.
And we went in, naturally, and walked up to the first one and raised the lid up. There were 3 bodies of black men in it, just thrown in there. And we went over to another crate, a larger crate, and raised the lid on it, and there was 4 bodies in this one. And there was, let's see, 1, 2, there's either 4 or 5 more boxes scattered around. And about that time, one of the men saw us, and he run us out.
The newspapers didn't think the mass graves deserved many headlines, and the White City Fathers, proud of their booming oil town, wanted to bury the story along with the bodies. The official version, typos and all, came in a National Guard report. It said there were 35 dead, 9 whites and 26 blacks. But that number just keeps on rising.
We think now that something like 300 people were killed in this.
How many people were left homeless by the riot?
Oh my gosh, 10,000 people were left homeless by the riot.
How many of those were white?
None.
The survivors lived in tents and shacks which they built themselves.
My brother was 14 at the time, and he helped my father install wood. It was raining, as I can remember, it rain. Seemed like it was rain, and we had a wooden floor in our tent. We were lucky to have that.
But Tulsa's whites gave them something. Promises.
Now, in fact, after the riot, the city's white establishment said it was going to rebuild Greenwood. What happened?
They lied. Not a dime. They proceeded to pass a fire ordinance that said, in effect, that you cannot build on property that had been burned. They wanted to starve blacks out of the land. They made it known to all philanthropic groups, we don't want your money. We would take care of our own. And there would be no problem. They spoke. They lied.
Courts and insurance companies paid some damage claims filed by whites. All black claims were rejected. A grand jury filed no charges against whites. 57 blacks were indicted for rioting. And in fact, they'd put up one hell of a fight.
In my community, among those survivors, they won the riot. They won it. You know, only till they brought airplanes in and dropped bombs and firebombs and brought the National Guard in could they subdue my people. That's the view from the black community, that airplanes and National Guard saved them white folks. We were winning.
For Ross, setting up a legislative commission to study the riot was a way of keeping that pride alive. Eddie Fay Gates is one of the members.
It said history is the lie agreed upon. Well, somebody agreed not to tell the story of the riot in Tulsa. At first, there was denial, you know. It didn't happen. It wasn't that bad. Now, Tulsa and Oklahoma's way past the denial stage.
The commission is looking for the truth by looking for the dead. But Greenwood is looking for more than just some unmarked graves.
Somebody has to pay when they do wrong. If you don't, if there's no penalty for wrongdoing, there's no incentive for societies to do the right thing.
Who should get reparations, the 60 or 70 survivors or the descendants of all the people who were wronged at the time?
My wish list, which I don't think we'll ever get, would be that there would be adequate monetary payments to survivors, the living survivors. For the descendants, maybe scholarships for the college-age children of these descendants.
The sons don't pay for the sins of the fathers. They pay for only their own sins.
State Representative Bill Graves opposed setting up the commission and thinks Tulsa should put the past where he says it belongs, in the past.
The statute of limitations is run on the people here involved that were injured.
What would you say to one of the survivors who would say to you, lost my home, lost everything my family had worked for?
I'd have to tell them that I didn't think they have any right to money from the legislature. This is a tragic thing that happened to them. Tragic things happen to other people that seems unjust to us, yet we have to live with them.
What do you think should come out of this? A memorial?
I have no problem with a memorial. That these people should be, I think, remembered and honored for for what they had to go through.
Don Ross says he doesn't need a memorial. He's already got one. His anger.
I feel strongly, if I'm ever satisfied with whatever we do, that I will let down some people who educated me in my life and who died angry. I am their living memorial. My anger is.
But George Monroe, the kid with the sore fingers, has a longer view about reparations, about monuments, and about everything that's happened and not happened in Tulsa since that dark day in 1921.
It's still here, even today in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Segregation is still here. It's still here. But it's loosening up a little bit now.
So 75 years after the riot, segregation is loosening up a bit.
A bit. That's a good description, just exactly what you said. A bit.
And Oklahoma is a unique space in terms of the number of African-American towns that were established. Some suggest upwards of 50 African-American towns. Between 1924 and 1928, Reverend S.S. Jones was going around documenting this sort of self-determined, vibrant African-American communities. You see the African-American educators, doctors, lawyers, landowners, oil barons. And I think that's what's so remarkable about this footage. To think that individuals, how many years out of slavery, are now owning oil wells that are producing 2,000 barrels a day. Is that not the ultimate American dream? Is that not the ultimate American story? It flies in the face of what I think some people consider part of African American history and culture. And I think that that was one of the things that Oklahoma and what S.S. Jones is really kind of showing is that African American history and culture is not a monolith. And in a way, it became kind of like a marketing tool to encourage individuals to migrate, to move there, that this is a place where you can live, you can thrive, and peacefully reside. There were still palpable racial tensions. There are lynchings, there's Jim Crow, segregation, there's all of these things, and you still have an African-American community, or many communities, that really speak to the fortitude and resilience of Black people in this country.
You've probably never read about the Tulsa race riots in history books when you were in school, but it's definitely a story that's worth knowing about, especially considering the riots that are currently taking place in Baltimore. The Tulsa race riots occurred in 1921, and it was basically a war by the KKK against a very successful and prosperous Black community referred to as Black Wall Street. According to reports, the best description of Black Wall Street, or Little Africa as it was also known, would be to compare it to a mini Beverly Hills. It was the golden door of the Black community during the early 1900s, and it proved that African Americans could create a successful infrastructure. Black America's most prosperous community, Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, went up in flames June 1st, 1921 in a KKK-led Tulsa race riot. This community consisted of individuals that looked out for one another. But more than that, it consisted of individuals that were beyond successful. Some of the most intelligent minds got together and created some of the most successful businesses. They looked out for one another. They created an education system that we can only dream of today. They believed in nepotism only because these Black individuals had been so disenfranchised by society that they felt that they could only look out for one another. And as a result, money stayed in their community. In fact, it was passed off about 100 times within the community before it left the community. Right now, when it comes to a Black neighborhood, $1 lasts in that neighborhood for about 15 minutes and then it leaves. And so they managed to create a society that was successful. They were prospering. But it turns out that white individuals in neighboring areas were not too happy about that, particularly the KKK. So this led to a riot, and the way the KKK crafted this riot shows you exactly how deep that jealousy and that envy was. What they did is they accused a man of raping a white woman. But of course that man didn't rape anyone. They just wanted to accuse him so they could go into the community and start violence and trouble. And so they accused this man. A number of KKK members go into the community, and as one black man is armed, ready to defend himself, he's confronted by a white individual who asks him what he's about to do with that gun. And he tells the white man, well, I'm going to do what I need to do if I need to defend myself. At that point, there was a physical altercation over the gun. The white man gets shot and he's killed, and then the riots erupt. Now, the outcome of this is beyond disturbing. The night's carnage left 3,000 African Americans dead and over 600 successful businesses lost. Among these were 21 churches, 21 restaurants, 30 grocery stores, and 2 movie theaters, plus a hospital, a bank, a post office, libraries, schools, law offices, a half-dozen private airplanes, and even a bus system. So the KKK goes into the successful black community and absolutely destroys it. And so when we talk about violence in the United States, and when we talk about things like white privilege or institutional racism, this is why it's incredibly important to take these issues seriously. Because when you look at the black community and you wonder why it is that they're angry, why it is that they're rioting, why it is that they're fighting back against things like police brutality and institutional racism, you have to look at the historical context of this country. You have to consider the fact that there was no restitution in this case. These people, 3,000 people, lost their lives. Their businesses were lost. What they had built was completely demolished. And you fast forward to today and you look at statistics and you realize, yeah, maybe things aren't quite as violent as the Tulsa race riots, but you have to consider the fact that African Americans are 4 times more likely to get arrested for marijuana. In fact, if you have a black-sounding name, you are 50% less likely to get hired for a job. When you look at our private prisons, or if you look at the school-to-prison pipeline, African Americans and Latinos are much more likely to be victims of that. And so these are the types of things that are holding them back. This is a type of institutional racism that we talk about on the show on a regular basis. And this is the type of story that we don't learn about in history classes. And again, you look at something like this and you realize that if you just create an opportunity for people to prosper, they will prosper, regardless of their race, regardless of their background. That's why education is important. That's why making sure that you give everyone an equal opportunity is important. And that's why it's incredibly important to take stories like the Baltimore riots as seriously as possible and understand that even though there are those who are violent and are doing things that might be considered wrong, there are also those who are legitimately arguing about something that they've been victims of for a very long time.
The South today is really not much different than the rest of the country, but the Old South, that's another story and what the Rosewood massacre is all about. 60 years ago, Rosewood in North Florida was a thriving little community of about 200 people, almost all of them black. Early in January 1923, some 1,000 whites came to town, and when they left about a week later, Rosewood had been burned to the ground. No one knows for sure how many people were killed there. The figures might be as high as 40. For 60 years, the story of Rosewood remained secret and was only uncovered recently by Florida newspaperman Gary Moore, who is writing a book on the massacre at Rosewood. Rosewood. There's a road sign proclaiming its name, but no memorial commemorating its dead. Located 9 miles from the Gulf of Mexico at Cedar Key, Florida, Rosewood today is little more than a trailer park. You search in vain for any sign of a slaughter, for any hint of the mass murder that took place here a long time ago.
Well, what did it look like?
It's a big blaze. You seen things on fire. A big blaze, just burning down, just burning up the whole thing, just burning up my grandmama's house, churches, and everything. They burned up everything we had, all our clothes and everything. Yeah, they burned it up.
Why did they burn everything?
They was mad.
But you were just little children.
I know it. What did we care? They didn't care. They killed us. I was about 8 years old.
Minnie Lee Langley was only a child when she became a refugee. Now, she's a great-grandmother. At her home in Jacksonville, Florida, we talked to her about the place where she was born, Rosewood, Florida, the place that haunts her memory.
I know they killed my aunt, and they killed my granddaddy. Made my granddaddy dug his hole. He didn't have but one arm, but they made him dug his own grave. And he prayed, and they shot him backwards in the grave.
At Rosewood?
At Rosewood.
This is where it all began, in the white settlement of Sumner, just a few miles from Rosewood. Sumner disappeared in the late 1920s when a fire destroyed the sawmill. But back in 1923, Sumner was a booming little company town. James and Fannie Taylor had a home not far from here. On the morning of January 1st, 1923, James Taylor was already at work at the sawmill when neighbors said they heard his wife Fannie screaming for help. Fannie told her neighbors that a man had entered her home and attacked her, a black man.
She opened the door, but he just knocked her down, and she was raped.
Edith Foster was 16 years old at the time. She remembers seeing the few hundred white men of Sumner joined by others from surrounding counties, even from out of state. She remembers how they grew into a mob seeking revenge.
If he hadn't ever went in on this white lady, you know, well, there'd never been nothing to it.
It's not known for sure who attacked Fannie Taylor. Some whites say it was Sylvester Carrier, a young, strong-willed black man from Rosewood. Some blacks say the attacker was a white man. They say it was Fannie Taylor's boyfriend. But a lot of people tend to think the attacker was a black convict who had escaped from a nearby chain gang. Whoever he was, he touched off a week-long killing party.
They just, a bad crew come in here, and they just wiped it off of the map.
That night, around about 9 o'clock or 8:30, there they come in a car.
They kept looking for this Sylvester, but they didn't seem to find him. And then they went back up there that night and to talk to his mother.
Calling for my aunt, saying, Sarah, Sarah, Sarah. And so my aunt didn't say nothing because she was scared too.
And that's when all the shooting began, you see.
They went to shooting all in the house, all upstairs in the windows.
These colored folks, you know, they were ready for it.
And I was sitting right between his legs. And he had the gun over to my right shoulder.
This was Sylvester.
Yes, I got on under him. And these old white people busted the door down. When they busted the door down, that's where he dropped them. He just dropped everyone, come to the door.
He shot them?
Yeah.
Well, they killed Mr. Anders before he got to the house. They loaded him with a buckshot right here. Killed him dead. They had to leave him there.
At least 2 white men were killed that night, forcing the mob to retreat. It was then that the black women and children, 12 or 13 of them, ran from the bullet-riddled Carrier home and into the woods. Minnie Lee Langley, 8 years old at the time, ran with them.
We had a aunt with us, so scrappy. She was just like a hen with a nest of biddies. She taken us to the woods, kept us out in the woods. She kept us out in the woods almost a week.
There's swamps out there.
Well, we stayed in there. Took her like a soldier and stayed out there in the woods.
You went through those swamps?
Yes, we went all out in the woods. And she built a little bit of fire for us to stay warm because it was so cold at night.
In the morning, the mob returned, several hundred strong. Inside the Carrier home, they found Sarah, Sylvester's mother. She was dead. They also found another body, a black man. Some people say it was Sylvester, but no one really knows for sure. What we do know is what happened next. The mob set the Carrier home on fire, and they watched it burn. And then that mob grew in size, it grew in anger, and it became even more violent.
You ain't never seen a mob like that.
Fred Kirkland was a teenager when he saw the mob rampaging through Rosewood.
They went wild. There was 1,000 to 1,500 people there by that time, and they're coming in from every direction. And they was crazy. They give the high sheriff and the deputies 5 minutes to get out of sight and not come back.
They told the sheriff and the deputy to get out of town and not come back?
Get out of there. Give them 5 minutes to get out of sight.
And what did the sheriff and the deputy do?
They left there. And then they went to burning houses, killing people you never seen.
Yeah, Sunday morning they came through here, you know, setting houses on fire. And as each one ran out, they'd shoot them, kill them. And there was a colored woman right here, lived just across here in the woods from me. And her name was Lexi Gordon. And she was sick. She had typhoid fever. And when she told her, the ones that was staying there with her, for them to go ahead and get away if they could, well, she'd just take whatever come, you know. Well, naturally, when they set the house afire, well, she ran out and ran out towards the back. And she had a back door, Johnny, you know, out there. And so she made for it. And they shot her before she got there.
But she had nothing to do with...
Nothing to do with it at all, whatever. And, well, it was the way with a lot of them, you see. That was the reason it was such a situation that we just couldn't understand. It was just a mad bunch of men come in here.
What do you think they got out of it? Why did they do it?
Motive, I guess. Satisfaction is all I can figure it out. I don't know what it was.
Satisfaction?
I reckon that was it.
Well, the whole place was in smoke around here, you know. And they said they had destroyed all the buildings. And said that there would be no more to live here no more, you know. They couldn't come back and live.
Miss Langley, would you go back to Rosewood with us?
I would go. I would go if y'all don't let them bother me or nothing like that. I don't want to go there and get hurt or nothing. Yeah.
You remember?
Hello, darling.
We brought Minnie Lee Langley back to Rosewood for the first time in 60 years. We also asked Lee Ruth Davis, Leroy Carrier, and Sam Hall, all survivors of Rosewood, to come back for a day.
Oh. Hello, Sammy.
Hey. You remember her, Mr. Hall?
Yeah. Oh, she looked at this for this Marcy.
Yeah. Oh, Lord, yeah. This is Marcy.
Was that what they used to call you?
That's what they call me, Marcy, yeah.
You look just like Miss Virginia.
Yeah, my mother.
Yeah.
I'm bringing back memory that I wished I could get rid of. You know what I mean? This has been a hobby. If you just had been here to listen to all this and see some of it, then you would have known just what it was. We lost everything.
Lost everything.
You own the land?
Yeah, we own our land, all of them.
And no one ever paid you any money for this land?
No.
You just lost it?
Took it.
What do you say to children today? Children like this boy, like your great-grandson, and people who didn't grow up when you grew up, and people who didn't go through what you went through, people who would say, this couldn't have happened in this country. Come on.
I would tell them like this. I said, don't ever stay in a place that white folks can surround it. Don't never stay in a place that white folks can surround it. Because if anything happens some ways else, they'll run you out from your home, just like they did us.
Not many whites lived in Rosewood at that time, really just a handful. Among the few who did live here was a man by the name of John Wright, who owned the general store. John Wright lived in this house. It's one of the few that has survived. To blacks in Rosewood, John Wright was a hero. He opened his home to many of the women and children who were hiding from that mob. And John Wright did even more. He was able to get a message to the railroad that said, "The town is on fire, send a train." And that's how many blacks escaped from Rosewood, by train.
Who was on the train? You were on the train?
I was on the train. I'll never forget it. It was night when the train come there. It was 4 o'clock. When we left Mr.
4
Wright.
o'clock in the morning?
That's right. And he told them, conductor, to pull the train on to stop anywhere on the road that he saw women's and children, but not men, because they didn't know who the men would be.
If it hadn't been for this house.
We wouldn't have been here, because we wouldn't have had nowhere to hide.
Rosewood. You won't find an accurate account of it in any history book. Yet, about 40 people were killed here one terrifying week 60 years ago. When you think about it, far greater atrocities have happened elsewhere in the world. But Rosewood belongs to America. It's a real American horror story. The wonder is that it stayed secret so long. Minnie Lee Langley never even told her family.
I didn't want them to know that I was scouting through the woods to stay out there all night long, out there in that cold and all that stuff. I didn't
Running
want
for your life?
Trying to save my life. I didn't want them to know just how I come along, you know, through all of this and what the white folks had did to us, because I thought it was really mean. What they did to us was mean, and did it without a cause.
By the early 50s, segregation was frayed by the war and torn in spots where the court had acted. The white primary was outlawed. Housing covenants outlawed. Some graduate and law schools were forced to admit blacks. But the court was aware that the big fight was still to come. The schools, K through 12, white children and black in the same classroom.
Southerners assumed that if grade school kids were in a desegregated setting, they'd get to know each other and they'd get to date each other and then they'd marry each other. And that was the strongest taboo that the South held.
Led by Thurgood Marshall and other young lawyers like Robert Carter, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund was running or aiding cases all over the country. The court picked 5 and consolidated them into one set of arguments, forever known as Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. As oral arguments approached, people camped outside the building to assure themselves a seat in the courtroom. NAACP lawyers Marshall and Carter were up against a formidable adversary, John W. Davis, a former presidential candidate making the last of his 140 appearances at the Supreme Court. But his arguments had a familiar ring. Separate wasn't necessarily unequal. Blacks should be happy with the way things were. Didn't states have the right to educate their children as they saw fit? When the 3 days of arguments were over, Davis was heard to remark, "I think we've got it won, 5-4, or maybe 6-3. The justices scheduled another hearing on the case. But before that could happen, Chief Justice Vincent died of a heart attack. President Eisenhower chose to nominate Earl Warren, formerly the governor of California. On May 17, 1954, there were signs. Some of the justices' wives showed up. Some clerks were tipped off. Then reporters rushed the courtroom.
Warren starts off in a bland manner, and you can't tell for a while as he's delivering the opinion what the outcome is going to be. And then he comes to the key line and he says, "And we unanimously hold that separate but equal has no place in the Constitution." And it was just electric in the courtroom when he said unanimous.
we conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. Therefore, we unanimously hold that the plaintiffs are deprived of the equal protection of the laws guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. Plessy v. Ferguson in education is no more, and in practice, Plessy v. Ferguson itself is no more. The era of Jim Crow, constitutionally speaking, is over.
This was precisely what we urged them, almost in that language. So it was gratifying to have the opinion come down almost in the language of the argument that we made to them.
In 1951, I'd used a plain geometry book that had been used by a white student in 1935. Brown said that that was over. The hand-me-down tubas that I played in the high school band from the white high schools, it said to me that that was ended. And it said to me that at some point, I would not have to travel from Atlanta to Greencastle in Indiana to get an undergraduate degree. That my family, my cousins, my neighbors could go to Georgia Tech and to the University of Georgia. The Supreme Court decision of 1954 was for me the Magna Carta. It was the second emancipation. It was a great moment.
February 13th was our first sit-in Nashville. On this sit-in, we had about 130 kids. I think on this day, many of us didn't realize just how important our movement would grow to be.
The targets of the Nashville students were the lunch counters at the city's 2 largest department stores and 4 variety stores. And for the first time, the community was confronted with Negroes in places where they had never been.
You go to a counter. You do not request that the person sitting next to you get up and leave. You merely come in and sit down beside him, as any human being would do. You cause no violence. You have no angry words. You're friendly, and it sort of helps to project the idea that here sits beside me another human being.
Altogether, it was a moving feeling within me that I was sitting there demanding a God-given right, and my soul became satisfied that I was right in what I was doing. At the same time, with something deep down within me, moving me, that I could no longer be satisfied or go along with an evil system. That I had to be maladjusted to it. And in spite of all of this, I had to keep loving the people who denied me service, who stared at me.
During the early weeks of February 1960, the demonstrations that came to be called the sit-in movement exploded across the South. Within a period of 2 months, the movement had spread to 65 cities involving every southern state, with the exception of Mississippi. The new tactic came as a surprise, creating bewilderment and confusion in the white communities and even among the Negroes themselves.
I think that people who strive to gain social acceptance through although they're called nonviolent or passive resistance, they're the most violent. I also think that it is in violation to my civil rights. If someone can say, you must serve me, if a man owns an eating establishment, if he can't choose whom he pleases to serve or not to serve, that can affect me and you and anyone else.
I would say that they should examine the white person very closely first to see whether or not they're going about it in the right way. Now, if I'm a businessman and people that I do not want in my business insist on either coming in or boycotting, which is their perfect right to do. And certainly it's not going to make me love them.
Breaking bread is essentially a family custom, almost a sacrament. Now, when you claim that you have been denied equal rights in participating in something that is regarded as a family custom or sacrament, and insist on being recognized, you're getting into dangerous ground, and ground that can be misconstrued, and in which you can be wrong. Now, the people in the South have always fed people who came and knocked at the back door and asked for something to eat. But they have always reserved the right to eat only with invited guests.
I have thought for a long time that Negroes should be allowed to sit at the counters where we are served downtown. This is just a part of many things that I think they should be allowed to do. I have felt that it really was not fair for them to be served in the stores as customers and not be allowed certain services, denied certain services within those same stores.
It's just like one snake could like a snake of his own kind better than with another, maybe. Something like that. I mean, a lion might like a lion. Another lion better than with a bear. That's just like white people and Negroes. I mean, white people naturally don't like white people better than they do Negroes.
Well, it's just not the things we're used to down here. I mean, they come in and they sit down, and we're not used to them sitting down beside us, because I wasn't raised with them. I never have lived with them, and I'm not going to start now.
During the weeks after the sit-ins began, opposition in the white communities of the South solidified, and the first signs of violence appeared. Those few whites who sympathized publicly with the sit-ins soon found themselves to be prime targets. One of these was a young divinity student in Nashville, Wilson Yates.
Well, I was downtown with a friend around Memorial Square. I'd actually gone back to put a nickel in the meter. My car happened to be parked by Memorial Square where the picketing was going on. And suddenly, we moved into a different world. There were the crowds shouting, "Niggers go home," and then there were the Negro students who were carrying posters asking for equal opportunity. And being thrown in the situation of the crisis, I had to act, and I had no other choice than to respond as I did. So I walked over and I asked the Negroes if it would help or harm if I carried a poster. They said it would help. Right before I went over, some white boys had entered the ring carrying derogatory posters like "Go home, coon," and "Send the bunnies home." And I entered the ring, and I started walking around. I was with a friend. One of the white boys walked over to this friend. He said something to him.
I told him when he come around on the white side, I just gonna hit him one time.
Here I was in the raw, walking around a square carrying a poster which said "Equal rights for all." And the crowds on each side yelling, "Get rid of the nigger lover, tell the nigger lover to go home," and they were referring to me. The boy came towards me. He cursed me out.
Yeah, because he was white, taking up for the nigger. That really got me over there when them two white boys started carrying signs for the niggers over there.
And then the momentum began to build from the crowd, and they said, "Hit the nigger lover, hit the nigger lover." And then there's that strange, long, lonely feeling where you're waiting for something to happen, and you don't know what's going to happen, but somehow, down deep, you're ready for it. And he walked up behind me.
I reached and grabbed that Yates boy to see how hard I could hit him.
He hit me in the back of the neck. I lurched forward, but I didn't fall. I regained my balance, and then in the midst of it, with the shouting and the jeering and the crowd of people, I suddenly felt this tremendous humiliation. Suddenly I had crossed into another race. I moved into a different world. I was a Negro feeling all of the rejection and humiliation he must have to go through every time he's rejected.
On the morning of the 27th, this was to be our first real violent day. It was the first time when we could really test our own convictions as far as nonviolent means were concerned. 5 ministers said to us, if you go downtown today, you're going to be arrested. Please don't go downtown because we're not prepared. We should have community behind us. Paul LaPrade, he was one of the few white students who were with us. They always pick on the white students because they hate to see white sympathizers.
I saw a bunch of coloreds sitting on the stools. They looked like a bunch of idiots sitting up there waiting for people to try to throw them off, and they looked like they were just trying to egg on a fight.
None of us looked back, but yet we could see everything that was going on through the long mirror. And it seems to me that when it happened, that all of us wanted to be hit. This was an experience that we needed to keep our movement going, to keep ourselves going, and to convince ourselves that we really were nonviolent.
On February 27th, was on Saturday afternoon, I was cruising down Fifth Avenue. In front of McClellan's, a man came out and said that there was a fight on the inside. There had been a disturbance, but there was a bunch of colored boys and girls on the stools and the counters, and the management asked that they leave, and I instructed him to ask them to leave, and they did not leave. I went and asked each and every one of them separately to leave. They didn't leave, so I instructed the men to place them under arrest. We placed them under arrest.
The policemen, they gave me an alternative. They said, son, you can sit here on the stool and act a fool, or you can get up and go home. And I made my choice. I decided that I would keep my seat. And they told me I was under arrest, and then they took me away.
When we cleared the stools, some more colored boys and girls and white boys and girls got on the seats. When we told them that they were under arrest and they had to leave, well, they got up. But as far as having anything personal against them or anything against them because they were either black or white, we arrested in this crowd several white boys and girls. It was just a case where we had to clean this man's store out, and we did it.
I'm C.E. Warren, turnkey at City Jail. I've never seen anything like it when they brought these kids in.
On February 27th, 80 Nashville students were arrested out of over 300 who were participating in the sit-ins that day. The first of a series of wholesale arrests throughout the South.
You're in jail. I'm joking. Man, what my mother gonna say when she hear about that?
The mother of 2 students who were in jail.
Well, there was plenty of anxiety on my part, but I always think of what Matthew Jr. told me. And when he called from the jail, he said, "Be cool, mother." And that was very trying, and yet it was amusing too. He's telling me to be cool at this point. So even now, when I think of it, I get quite a bit of fun out of it. Just hearing him say it, I can't say it as he said it, but he said, "Be cool, mother." And I tried to be cool. So I felt, though, that there would be safety for them, because I felt that our faith in God would help to bring them through this safely.
This is Mike Wallace in New York. In our studios in Chicago is Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King, I understand that you have just reached agreement with Mayor Richard Daley of Chicago. Does that mean that the threat of violence tonight in Chicago is considerably diminished in your estimation?
Well, I certainly hope so, and in a sense I feel that the threat of violence tonight is diminished a great deal as a result of the agreement. I don't want to give the impression that the agreement reached this afternoon will in any way solve the ultimate problems which we face in Chicago, but I do think they will do a great deal to ease tensions tonight.
We'll have an opportunity to talk to you at some length later in this broadcast, Dr. King.
CBS News presents a special report. The Chicago Riots. Here is CBS News correspondent Mike Wallace.
Chicago is the second city of this nation. Tonight, it is the nation's #1 battleground, embroiled in racial crisis. It is a proud and prosperous city, home of the meat packer, the nation's rail hub, merchant to the Middle West. Luxury skyscrapers attest to its affluence. Yacht clubs dot its lake shores. Gracious suburbs lie around its central core. But in that central core are the Negro ghettos, where the turmoil of the last 3 nights was spawned. Almost 1 of every 3 persons in Chicago's 3.5 million is a Negro. Citywide, unemployment among those Negroes is 3 times that of whites. And among teenagers, the disparity is even greater. 8 out of 10 Negro children go to segregated schools. The annual income of the average Negro family in Chicago is 40% lower than the average white families. Into that environment last Sunday came Dr. Martin Luther King, moving the Negro Revolution from south to north. Last Sunday, Dr. King addressed a civil rights rally, an anti-poverty rally at Chicago's Soldier Field. He outlined 35 demands for equal rights, and he insisted that nonviolence was the only way to achieve them. After speaking, Dr. King led his followers on a 3-mile march to City Hall to post a list of those demands to make Chicago, in his words, a free and open city. Those demands, among other things, called for open housing, more Negro employment, and negotiations by the city with so-called welfare unions organized by the civil rights movement. And then at City Hall, as King used adhesive tape to post the demands, the marchers crowded round him. King took the dramatic action just a day before meeting with Chicago's Mayor Richard Daley on the problems of the Chicago Negro.
yourself an African American, go back to Africa. If you're an African first, go back to Africa. If you're an African first, go back to Africa. Go back to Europe. Nigga, go back to Europe. Black lives don't matter to other inner city blacks.
So we are in the Virginia Historic Society Museum, and we stumble upon an exhibit. We got a family over there doing this thing, little man dabbing, and I stumble upon this guy. They're gonna call my man, try to see if we can zoom in. They call him the cigar store figure with African facial features and Native American dress, about 1880 to 1890. Really? So an African American was dressed as a Native American in 1880 to 1890? I highly think not. But okay, racial identity. This tobacco store figure evokes the history of enslaved African Americans who grew tobacco, and the Indians who introduced it. It also reveals the stereotypes held by many whites, sorry, you got a part in the lighting, of both as equally inferior. That perception allowed the Virginia General Assembly in 1924 to pass the Racial Integrity Act, which labeled both simply as colored. Labeled us both as colored. As state records were altered, Virginia Indians were stripped of their identity. All right, again, we got this gentleman right here. He has the feathered skirt, kind of kilt, if you want to. He has the feathered hat, the feathered crown. And we see the features. We see them curls in the back of their head. Zoom in on that. And this is the gentleman. This is the brother. The indigenous American. Let's stop playing.
Oh, look at the back. See this here?
Yes, baby. Lights out. Peace.